a lot of our insights into why certain things work, they just don't really hold up. Probably don't have to worry too much about your sleight of hand. But do we actually really know what good magic is and what magic itself is? Yeah, if you don't want to hear the answer, close your ears now.
Hey guys! Recently a new book appeared on my beloved magic shop, The Vanishing Inc., written by Dr. Gustav Kuhn and Dr. Alice Paes. The book is called Psychology of Magic from Lab to Stage. I'm super excited to get my copy of the book, and it should arrive in the following days, not only because I think this is a great book and it was a bestseller, an instant bestseller on The Vanishing, but also because a few weeks ago I had a chance to interview Gustav Kuhn about his work as a researcher of the psychology of magic. I had a chance to get to know Gustav at the Session Magic Convention in London in January 2023, where I also was presenting, and I was just fascinated by his research and the research that Gustav, Alice and the whole team of the Science of Magic is doing. Since I myself did academic research in magic as part of art history, I admire people who go on this challenging journey of researching magic from an academic perspective, because I know how difficult and how complicated it might be to prove to all the other people that magic is actually a valid and fascinating subject for scientific and academic research. Gustav Kuhn dedicated his whole professional career to studying the psychology of magic, trying to understand the mechanisms that lie behind magic tricks and why actually magic works, what it does to our mind, why do we react to magic in the way that we react to magic. Dozens of experiments with thousands of participants, plenty of scientific papers make Gustav leading world expert on this subject. Apart from that, he is a magician, which means that he really does have things to share with the magic community. So please enjoy this interview. I'm sure that you will get a lot of insight, motivation to learn more about psychology, and also a chance to look at magic from a different perspective. There'll be plenty of links in the description under this video, so you can explore more about the work that Gustav and his team are doing. And of course, subscribe to this channel and like this video if you like this video, and maybe even share it with your friends who are interested in magic, history of magic or psychology of magic. You can also stay in touch with me on Instagram @RomanofMagic, where I regularly post updates about new upcoming videos or projects that I'm working on. And now, let's begin. At a random party during a small talk, when someone asks you what do you do, how would you actually explain it to a person what you do?
That's such a hard question. I'm really struggling myself. I have a bit of an identity crisis, to be honest. I guess one way of summarizing is that I studied the psychology of magic to learn more about the human brain.
And speaking about magic and your way in magic, so I was really excited to find out in your book that you mentioned that you were learning from Cellini, or like was at some point a student of him. And I guess the name which is familiar to, if not a lot of magicians, I think, around the world. So maybe you can just tell me a bit more about this experience, like how this came about, and what was your story of your interaction with Cellini.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Switzerland, and as a teenager, I was obsessed with magic, like many teenagers are. And I was very fortunate to get to know Jim Cellini. He taught me a lot of what I know about magic, and I was very much brought up in the Sleight and Misdirection school of magic. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I became so interested in psychology, because even for Cellini, it's very important. I mean, when you watch Cellini, his sleight of hand wasn't that great. Like, he didn't have amazing technique, but he managed to really captivate his audience through his personality, but also through the effective use of misdirection. And that really struck quite deep in me, in realizing that actually maybe your sleights don't have to be that perfect. If you master the art of misdirection, then you can cover pretty much most things.
Did you yourself have an experience of performing street magic at any point?
Yeah, that was my aim. So yeah, being a student of Cellini, he very much forced us into the street. We kind of, part of my training with Cellini, he would get me to perform in bars and perform in the street. And my big aim, I was performing in Switzerland, was to move to London and become a professional street performer. London, that was back in the sort of early 90s. It was quite a difficult time to perform in the streets in London. Magic, I don't think it was that kind of magic, wasn't very popular. and I just couldn't get enough work. I also don't think I was really cut out to be a professional street performer, so I failed. And I think it's because of this failure that I was then drawn towards academia. And I think that's the reason why I'm an academic now.
So what came first? Was it first your interest in magic or your interest in science? And when did it all kind of come together and you realize that you kind of can transition from one to another?
Yeah, well, the magic definitely came first. I hated school. If I look back at my teenage self, the idea that I was ever going to be working at a university just seemed completely alien. All I wanted to do was be a professional magician. And to do so, I learned lots of other things. So, from some really weird stuff to trying to learn about palm reading or reading body language. None of that stuff really worked. But psychology was always something that I was really interested in, but not necessarily about just understanding the human mind. It was very much to use this as a tool to improve my magic. And that's what motivated me to go and study psychology. I didn't want to become a psychologist. I wanted to be a better magician. And I felt, well, if I want to perform magic, I need to understand how the human brain works. But when I arrived at university, the kind of psychology that I was being taught couldn't be applied to magic. When I'd asked my professors, none of them had ever thought about magic. There was no books, or very few books on the psychology of magic. And it was during that time that I started to lose interest in magic and became much more fascinated by the human brain. And so I pretty much almost dropped magic. I then did a PhD in consciousness. It was through a fluke by hanging out with lots of vision researchers who were particularly interested in measuring eye movements whilst people were doing everyday tasks such as driving or making a cup of tea. And we thought, hey, it'd be quite interesting to look at where people look whilst they're being misdirected by a magician. So we took eye trackers, took them down into the lab, or it wasn't the lab, we took them actually to the pub. I performed some magic tricks, we measured people's eye movements, and we realized that there's lots of interesting things that could be learnt about human cognition through that. And for me, that was very much the beginning, like the penny dropped. It was in the past, I just tried to study psychology as a way of improving my magic. And I realized that actually magic can teach us a lot about the human brain. So a lot of the things that we magicians do, such as misdirecting people's attention or forcing a decision, those tools can be used to try and understand how the human brain works. And so for the last 20 years, that's what I've been doing.
Your book, Experiencing the Possible Science of Magic, I believe that was your first book, like written for general audience. So do you remember when you came up with an idea to write this book?
For the last 10 years, I've been teaching a course on the psychology of magic. And that very much uses magic as a way of teaching psychology students about certain cognitive functions. So we've got lectures on perceptual illusions or misdirection, memory, and a lot of that course, the course really evolved over the time, because when I started a lot of this research, there weren't that many academic papers out there, and it was quite hard for me to point students in the right direction. And I felt, well, one way to do this would be to write a book. So the initial idea for writing the book was inspired for me to come up with some material. So I created a course, and the book itself, so each chapter pretty much mapped onto one of the lectures. And that was the birth of the book. But the main audience for the book is the general public. It's not a book that's written specifically for magicians. It was trying to demonstrate to the general public that there's a lot more to magic than just simple tricks, that we could learn a lot about the human brain by studying some of these principles. And because of this counterintuitive nature, magic provides us with a great tool to understand some really surprising limitations. So if we think about visual perception, we assume that we're aware of most of the things that are going on around us. And yet, actually, if we look at the data, if we look at the psychological models, we're only aware of a fraction of this information. And a lot of these principles are really difficult to understand. And magic provides a great tool to explain some of these complex principles. And so it's an approachable way of teaching normal people about the beauties of the human mind.
And you mentioned already, like as you started dealing with this topic, there were very few papers on magic and very few people dealing with the subject. So did you experience was it challenging or difficult when you started introducing magic and offering it as an idea for a course, idea for research? Did you have to struggle through some sort of lack of trust or understanding from your peers and colleagues, or did everybody welcome it right away?
When I started my first experimental investigation into magic, which was about 2003, there was barely any scientific research on magic. Some of the older papers, they dated back to about 1900. So Norman Triplett had done some great work. So when I tried to devise my first experiment on magic, I had to rely on studies that had been conducted about 100 years beforehand. And that makes it quite difficult because as a young scientist, it's quite hard to go up to your professor and go, well, I'd like to study magic. The first question that they'll ask, well, has anybody done anything on this before? And go, well, no. And so it seems like too high a risk. So the first papers were really high risk in terms of using magic as a way of studying perception. But we did it. And then I guess the next challenge was that scientists would be going, oh, well, yeah, this is interesting. It's quite entertaining. It's a bit fun. Can it actually tell us anything that is of scientific interest? And that was the biggest hurdle. So I think for the first 5 years, I'd say, my fellow scientists were interested in it. They thought of it as an interesting gimmick, but they failed to understand the scientific value of actually doing so. But I think this has really changed. So now it's not just me doing this, there's lots of other scientists. We've got the Science of Magic Association, which is a whole international organization that brings together magicians and scientists together. In fact, most of the criticism that we've been receiving has been come from the other side. So now, once we established the science of magic in the scientific world, magicians started to poo-poo some of the research that we were doing. And so this has meant that my research for the last few years has turned the other way around to try and explain to magicians how they can be using some of these findings from the science to improve their magic. And that's not easy because in the same way that some scientists felt that, well, the things that you're doing are sort of a bit irrelevant, magicians often feel that by trying to understand some of the specific mechanisms, that's got a too narrow a focus to be applicable to magic. But I mean, I think a lot of the findings that we've been discovering in the scientific world have got major implications in terms of how you can improve your magic. And so Alice Pale and I, Alice is a brilliant PhD student of mine, we wrote another book, our second book, which is called The Psychology of Magic, which is going to come out next month through Vanishing Inc. And that turns the whole story around. So this is a book that is purely written for magicians, teaching magicians about the psychology of magic. There's studies in there that are specifically designed to help magicians, and giving them a crash course in psychology to learn more about their art form. And I strongly believe that for once we need to use scientific methods to evaluate how good our magic is. So we're all very good at kind of like, oh, well, that trick works. That's a really good trick, but do we really know? One of the biggest insights from psychology is that our insights into what we do and how people perceive it is often completely wrong. So if we truly want to advance our arts, we need to get objective measurements. And so psychology provides these tools. But also, once you understand how the human brain works, once you understand some of these limitations, hopefully that will allow you to then create much more powerful magic tricks. It's a bit like if you try to fix a car. I know very little about a car. If I open the engine, I wouldn't be able to fix it. A mechanic who understands how it works, they'll be able to spot the problem immediately and improve its performance. And I think it's the same with magic. Once you understand the blueprint of the brain, you can hopefully perform and create much more powerful magic tricks.
First of all, it's great news that the book is coming out next month, because I was checking pretty regularly because I missed it. Buying it. It was sold out.
Copy here. So
That's amazing. There's a
it's a fat book. It's a big, but
it's a fat book.
It is. It's a really fat book. It's quite dense, but it is. Once you've read that, you will be up to date on all of the research on the science of magic, and you should have a pretty good understanding of why magic works.
How did your understanding of misdirection changed throughout your research from the point when you were just a magician and when you actually start investigating it? And maybe as a follow-up question is, were there any other things that changed in your mind and how you see, some principle of magic, which for you were like obvious when you were just doing it as a performer, and then you actually discovered that it's...
A lot of our insights into why certain things work, they just don't really hold up. Like, I think one of the slight issues with the magic community, I think we've gained lots of really valuable information about how tricks work and what kind of tricks work. But it's all based on informal evidence, and quite often we do things just because we're told that's how you should do something. You go to a magic convention, you've got a big magician, they'll say, yeah, I did this, it worked, you should do exactly the same thing. Now, that's how we did medicine back in the old days. But I think we're at a very similar stage where we often just do things because we feel that's the way to do it. A lot of my research has shown that actually people are a lot more gullible and more easily deceived than we normally think they would be. So what that means is that I think you could probably get away with a lot more than most people think they do. But then there's also kind of specific things as well. So for example, did work on the crisscross force. I always assumed that to perform a crisscross force effectively, you need lots of misdirection. Turns out, actually, once you test it, it works just as well without any misdirection. With the equivocate force, I always thought that if you're having these big inconsistencies, people will pick up on these inconsistencies. They really don't. So I think, almost depressingly, I've learned that people are just, maybe some magicians already know this, but they're just a lot more susceptible. Actually, this is the depressing thing. You probably don't have to worry too much about your sleight of hand because people won't see it anyway. So maybe that's a justification for me not to practice my magic that much. But I guess one of the things is, yeah, you can get away with a lot more. The second question in terms of misdirection, again, that is something, my thoughts about misdirection have changed a lot. For me, misdirection in the early days was very much about attention. I thought of misdirection as being about the principles that magicians use to misdirect your attention. So following someone's gaze or different types of movements or sounds, these kind of things. But as we've been working more on misdirection and came up with a taxonomy of misdirection, it's like a big theory of misdirection, come to realize that actually most magic involves misdirection, because misdirection is not just used to manipulate what you see. You can use misdirection to manipulate how people remember something. So Juan Tamariz performs beautiful routines where you can see exactly what's going on, but he uses very subtle memory misdirection techniques to ensure that you're misremembering something. So that falls in the scope of misdirection, but it's got nothing to do with how you perceive something. But then there's other techniques, that instances where you can see the method perfectly, you can remember how it's done, but you just can't work it out. So, for example, like a theory of four solutions. So if you implanting a four solution in someone's implanting a four solution, such as, for example, in a sucker trick, and then you destroy that four solution, that can prevent people from working out how the trick is done. Now, that's got nothing to do with perception, doesn't involve memory. It deals with the way that you reason, the way that your audience thinks about how the trick is done. And so it becomes quite difficult really to find what misdirection actually is. Once you start looking at the principles in a lot more detail, it becomes quite hard to distinguish between misdirection and deception, and it becomes really difficult to imagine any magic trick that does not involve misdirection. I mean, Alex, can you think of a magic trick that does not based on some form of misdirection?
I guess not.
Yeah, I mean, Jean-Hugues, he sort of said magic is misdirection and misdirection is magic, and I probably actually agree. It's a bit like, I mean, so in our new book as well, I've become very interested in the nature of magic, like what magic itself is, and we've coming up with the new taxonomy of magic. And do you think that's, given that that's sort of like the center of our art form, magicians would have written a lot about the nature of magic? But we all know we all know a good magic trick, we all know a bad magic trick, but do we actually really know what good magic is and what magic itself is? And I've been quite surprised by going through the magic literature how few magicians have actually written about the nature of magic.
I had a look at some. I will not lie that I read all your papers, but I read some, and in one of the recent ones, it was available online as well, like a balanced view of impossible aesthetics, where you describe an experiment with, if I remember it correctly, like students being presented with a balance illusion by Joshua J, and then what you did is, I think as an idea, it's pretty fascinating, like to scientifically measure the level of enjoyment which magic trick produces. What was your experience with this experiment, and do you plan more of that in the future? Is it also part of your future books?
Yeah, I mean, feedback is important for any endeavor. If you want to become a better sportsman, you need to get feedback from a coach, or you need to know how well you are performing, how fast you are running, what needs to be improved. And the same is true for magic. And I think magic has got a lot of challenges because we very rarely receive reliable feedback. So we did surveys asking magicians as to what kind of feedback they use. And most magicians will use audience reactions. But we know that audience reactions is not very reliable. So think about laughter, for example. Like, people don't laugh because something is funny. Like, laughter is a social signal. So when you're watching a comedy at home on telly, you're not going to laugh. That doesn't mean it's not funny. It's just you're not using it as a way of conveying information. An audience reaction is doesn't offer reliable feedback as to how good your performance is. But then asking people directly is quite difficult as well. Some people will film their performance, which is a lot better. But even kind of like filming it, when you're watching it, you will experience the magic trick very differently because you know how it's done than your audience. So it's a huge challenge. And of course, this is a challenge that we always face in psychology. But there are ways in which you can do that. Now, I'm not a professional magician. I don't have to get another booking from my magic, and so I can afford to perform magic that's not so good and directly ask people what they think about it without fear of giving away any of the secrets. And that really frees me up. And so that means we can actually gain a lot more insights into what people really enjoy about magic and how magic works because we don't have these constraints. And so I guess my advice to magicians, and we write about this quite extensively in the book, is to use some of these scientific tools just on small samples. Like, as a psychologist, I can't ask everybody in the world. So what I do is I test a small sample of people, and I can then use statistical analyses to extrapolate based on that performance how other people think. And I think you could do the same in magic as well. So you could run a focus group, you invite some people into a performance. They're not paying to see you, you are now paying them to get data, and then you get that data that you can use questionnaires, or you can get someone else to kind of like to talk about them to really understand what it is about the magic that they really enjoy.
You described that's another topic like of beliefs, which you're dealing with a lot, and which you also mentioned in your book, which I also think like magic is a fascinating tool to discover more about beliefs and how and why we believe in things. And you described an experiment where you presented a couple of students with basically, as I understood, a colleague or a friend of yours who performed a display of mind reading or mentalism, but you gave an introduction that it's a genuine, or a person who you believe might have a genuine psychic abilities, and in the end, the students in the group were convinced, or at least at some point, pretty much convinced that that's true. So, do you think and it's more of from your personal perspective? Because when you see a performance of mentalism or mind reading, in 99% of the cases, people provide a false explanation of what they're doing, that what they're doing is based on body language or influence or neurolinguistic programming and all these words which by themselves make sense, but we all know that's not what happens on stage. But people genuinely believe them, and in most cases, they believe them firmly that it's not a trick. So do you think that it's an ethical, and it's more of an ethical question. What's your attitude towards these false explanations? Because you see how easy it is to it's a very small step between believing, in something like this, and then next step you can make people believe in talking to the dead again, So
yeah, if you don't want to hear the answer, close your ears now. Yeah, so we've been carrying this is a long research project. We've been trying to use magic as a way of understanding paranormal beliefs. So these type of experiments, we perform mind reading effects. They're quite powerful effects, using stooges and electronic devices and sort of like some cold reading. And but we sell this as sort of a genuine exploration of the paranormal. Now, I've been really horrified by the ease by which you can actually, just using fairly simple magic tricks, you can get people to genuinely believe that these phenomena are possible. These are all very bright students. They go to university. They know that I study magic, and yet quite a lot of them believe that these phenomena are genuinely possible. But for me, the most worrying thing has been that just simply telling participants beforehand that the person is using tricks and deception has zero impact on their beliefs. So some situations they're told, like Lee Hathaway was one of the performers, so he came up dressed up as a bit of a psychic, and we told our participants, well, Lee is not actually a real psychic, he's just a magician, who uses tricks and deception to give the illusion of supernatural powers. They write these instructions down in their own words. And a few minutes later, when we ask them, well, what did you see? They go, oh yeah, Lee had genuine supernatural powers. And I was horrified. It's like, how can this be? Like, surely I have just told you literally minutes beforehand that Lee is a fraud. And yet they still genuinely believe it's possible. And actually kind of like that type of framing has zero impact on how they interpret what they've seen. And we've been running these studies for nearly 10 years now, run thousands of people in these experiments, and the results are always the same. Simply telling someone that they're seeing a trick has zero impact on their beliefs. And it also perpetuates some of these beliefs. So we can measure people's beliefs in spiritualism before and after, and actually these kind of demonstrations significantly increase. There's not a huge increase, but changing beliefs is really very difficult. But within that one demonstration, it can increase people's beliefs in these supernatural powers. And so, as a magician, this is really bad news because, or at least, I mean, as a magician with kind of like a moral conscience, because of course, quite often mentalism, what we do is we do these great effects and we tell our audience beforehand, oh, well, none of this is real. I'm sorry, but those kind of disclaimers just really don't work. And so I guess, I mean, it's not for me to tell magicians what they should or should not do, but what I can tell you is that a disclaimer alone is absolutely pointless. So just telling your audience that what you're doing is not real, you might as well not tell them anything about it. And it's only actually when you start debunking the trick, so when you tell your audience exactly how the tricks are done, that's when the spell can be broken.
Is there something that you took from your research into your life as kind of an insight that helps you just on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't trust anything. Like I mean, a lot of my research into research and magic shows that basically the experience I take for reality is really just a compelling illusion. Like it's our brain, it's an amazing piece of machinery that allows us to perceive the world. We can interact with the world. We're going to remember things. But it does that in a highly efficient way, and that means there's got to be lots of shortcuts, and that can lead to errors. So these could be perceptual illusions, memory errors, but more generally, just because I see something, because I experience something, doesn't mean that it's there. So, but it's a compelling illusion, and it's an illusion that's really hard to challenge. And even for myself, I mean, I study this stuff pretty much most days, and yet it's hard for me to imagine just how little I'm actually aware of. Like, our brain does an amazing job at conjuring up the vivid illusion of the world. And so I guess kind of for me, the main take-home message, there's two take-home messages. Kind of like one is that just don't trust yourself. Don't trust the things that you see. Just because you see something or remember something doesn't mean that that's the way the world actually is. But I guess I think kind of like more generally is that we often think of these perceptual errors as errors or mistakes. They're really not. Our brain has evolved to do things efficiently, and it does so incredibly well. And to do so, you need to use tricks, like with a magician. But any trick can lead to errors. And so these errors that we experience, they're really not flaws or faults. They just highlight the beauty of the human brain, and they highlight just how amazing we are at being able to interact with the world. So yeah, we should celebrate these errors rather than thinking of them as mistakes.
A book, or maybe 2 or 3 books that you come to mind that you think magicians should read if they want to become better at what they do?
I guess most of it would be, I mean, I'm interested in magic theory, but there's not actually that many theory. There's not that many theory books because most magic theory is packed within different magic tricks. But there are a couple that really spring out to mind to me. For one, like Tamaris's books, The Magic Way, I think is an amazing book. I think everybody should read that. But also Darwin Ortiz's books. I absolutely love his books. I think it's really amazing theories. The kind of books that you can read over and over again. So Strong Magic and Designing Miracles. I think every magician should read those. And
last one. So what is the next big thing or project that you're most excited about?
I guess for magicians, like we've been doing quite a lot of projects for magicians. So one project that we've been doing at the moment is we've developed a new questionnaire that we can use to measure magic competencies, which I'm very excited about. But we probably need a whole other podcast to kind of like talk about that. Yeah, and sort of other projects that look more generally at forms of deception. We're using magic to create placebo mind reading machines as well. So yeah, there's lot out there. But I guess sort of like for magicians, I think our new measure of magic competency is going to be super interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to sharing that because it's very much a data-driven approach. So we've got data from about 400 magicians looking at different competencies and then using artificial intelligence and sort of like neural networks to try and come up with the competencies that can describe magicians. So I think that'll be So watch the space. There'll be lots of interesting things to come out.
Wow.
And also, I guess sort of like just at the end as well, like anybody who's interested in the science of magic, do connect with the Science of Magic Association. We've got a newsletter. We don't spam you, but you'll get an email maybe like about every 3 months or so, and we disseminate sort of lots of interesting information about the science of magic.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's exactly also what I wanted to add. Like that, there's a wonderful website of Science of Magic, and it is true that you will not get spammed because I'm a subscriber and I don't. So it's from my personal experience, I can confirm. Well, Gustav, thank you so much. That was for me lots of insights, very exciting things, and lots of food for thought. I think for our viewers as well. So yeah, thank you for being here,
Thank you very
for
much,
sharing
Alex.
your knowledge
Thanks
and
for having me
experience.
on your channel.